Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG Show for Thursday, December the 2nd, 2021. First up, Omnishambles, which is a term, a neologism invented by Malcolm Tucker in the thick of it. And this very well describes where we are near the end of the second year of COVID. I'm going to start with an essay by Paul Kingsnorth in unheard.com. He begins, perhaps it's my age or perhaps it's just blind prejudice, but when I wake to the news that the Austrian government has interned an entire third of its national population as a danger to public health, a chill runs down my spine. I look at the news photos of armed, masked, black clad police stopping people in the streets to ask for their digital papers, and I read stories of others arrested for leaving their own house more than the permitted once a day, and I hear Austrian politicians intoning that those who refuse to accede to the injection are to be shunned and scapegoated until they acquiesce. Then I watch interviews with so called ordinary people, and they say that the unvaxxed had it coming. Some of them say they should all be jailed, these enemies of the people. At best, these anti vaxxers are paranoid and misinformed. At worst, they are malicious and should be punished. Then I look across the border at Germany. I see that in Germany, politicians are also considering interning the vaccine hesitant and are also discussing enforcing vaccination upon every citizen. By the end of the winter, says Germany's refreshingly honest health minister, Germans will be vaccinated, cured, or dead. There is apparently no fourth option. They've been busy in Germany. Recently, they put up fences in the streets in Hamburg to separate the bad unvaxxed from the good vaxxed at the Christmas markets, outdoors. Perhaps they will also provide the good people with rocks to throw across those fences. The mood certainly seems ripe. A cartoon recently published in the mainstream, high circulation newspaper Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung featured a man sitting on a sofa playing a first person shooter game in which the targets were unvaccinated people. The caption described it as a big hit under the Christmas tree. Not that Germans or Austrians have any monopoly on the current march towards authoritarianism in the name of public health. It is entirely globalized. The opinion recently expressed by Pulitzer Prize winning American art critic Jerry Saltz to his 500,000 Twitter followers was typical of the new form of class hatred that is somehow acceptable in the age of cancellations and hypersensitivity. My latest COVID thought is let her rip, he wrote, meaning we who are lucky enough to be triple and double vaxxed are pretty protected. Let the rest die. I know they pose a danger to us all, but we are more than 97% protected from them. If they want to die, I say let them die. Freedom. Now, that is from Pulitzer Prize winning American art critic Jerry Saltz. The essay continues. Across Europe and the wider world, the picture is the same: internment, mandatory medication, segregation of whole sections of society, mass sackings, a drumbeat media consensus, the systematic censoring of dissent, the deliberate creation of a climate of fear and suspicion, the deepening demonization of the unvaxxed. Something terrible is rising around us, and we are only just waking up to it. I'm watching all this from Ireland, the country which has the highest adult vaccination rate in Western Europe at over 94% of the population. Here, cases are accelerating so fast that we were all told recently to work from home, and another lockdown is widely feared. New restrictions for children who are least at risk from COVID are being proposed, and a midnight curfew has recently been imposed on pubs and nightclubs. This is odd, as only vaccinated people have been allowed into them since the summer, with the scan of a smartphone enabled QR code being the only way to access much of society. In an honest society, all of this would have been subject to robust public debate. We would have seen scientists of all opinions openly debating on TV and radio and in the press, views of all kinds aired on social media without fear of censorship journalists properly investigating reports of both vaccine successes and vaccine dangers, serious explorations of alternative treatments, public debates about the balance between civil liberties and public health, and what public health even means. But we have not seen this, and we will not see it, for debate, like dissent, is out of fashion. The media here has not asked a critical question of anyone in authority for at least 18 months. Google's algorithms are busy burying inconvenient data, while the social media channels from which most people receive their worldview are removing or suppressing critical opinions, even if they come from virologists or editors of the British Medical Journal. And Paul Kingsnorth continues. What could possibly justify this? One answer might be the combination of a terrible pandemic, which killed or maimed large percentages of those it infected, and the existence of a safe and reliable medicine which was proven to prevent its spread. This, of course, is what we are said to be living through. This is the narrative. But it is clear enough by now that the narrative is not true. COVID-19 is certainly a nasty illness which should be taken seriously, especially by those who are especially vulnerable to it. For the elderly and infirm, especially, it could be a serious risk, but it is not dangerous enough, if anything could be, to justify the frightening atmosphere which is rising across the world. The authoritarian response to the virus has been the go to solution for governments everywhere, and the climate of fear in society as a whole has often meant enthusiastic support for such a response. As the vaccines fail to end the pandemic, new variants continue to arise, and every promise of unlocking ends with the reimposition of restrictions, so the calls grow for more clampdowns, more segregation, more isolation, and internment. With each new call, a new roughness comes over the culture. The roughness is what leads to the persecution, abuse, and scapegoating of anyone foolish enough to stick their head above the parapet and question the narrative, and that in turn leads to more people walking away from those who promote it. The solidarity of the pandemic's early days already feels like a century ago. Day by day, the combination of breakdown and clampdown eats like an acid through the social fabric of a society already riven by a culture war that seeks enemies first and understanding very much later. All of this has descended like a flock of birds on one single technology, the vaccine, on which all hopes and fears converge. But the divisions that have opened up in society about the COVID vaccines are not really about the vaccines at all. They are about what they symbolize, what it means to be vaxxed or unvaxxed, safe or dangerous, clean or dirty, sensible or irresponsible, compliant or independent. These are questions about what it means to be a good member of society and what society even is, and they are detonating like depth charges beneath the surface of the culture. In his fascinating Substack newsletter, The Stoa, academic Peter Limberg proposes an analysis of the ongoing COVID wars. He identifies two positions on the virus and the reaction to it. Both are generalizations. Plenty of people will cleave fully to neither. But broadly speaking, which you identify with will inform your view of who the other is. Limberg describes the first position, the thesis, like this. Lockdowns are needed to contain the virus, masks work and need to be mandated, vaccines are safe, people should take the vaccine to protect themselves and others, and vaccine passports will help open things up quicker and encourage those who are hesitant to get vaccinated. The thesis is the establishment position. It is held, in Limberg's words, by legacy media, NGOs, universities, Western governments, and mimetic tribes on the political left. In contrast, the opposing view, the antithesis, is held by a ragtag of political dissidents of all stripes, from right-wingers to anarchists, motivated to cluster for different reasons around an alternative story. Quote, lockdowns are not needed, masks do not work, the safety and efficacy of the vaccines are being oversold. Again, not my opinion, this is from Limberg. Vaccine passports will not only fail, but further segregate society in the near future. We can expect Girardian scapegoating of the unvaccinated. In other words, we are positioned on the precipice of a slippery slope that leads toward increasingly draconian biopolitical control measures, the grip of which is unlikely to release even once the pandemic is over, unquote. What we see around us now, as the thesis visibly fails, is more and more people looking around for explanations and landing on versions of the antithesis. As that happens, more of those who support the thesis feel threatened and angry. The people questioning the thesis, to them, are not thinking human beings wondering what is going on and not getting satisfactory answers. They are conspiracy theorists and anti vaxxers and far right actors whose views will lead to mass death. In response to this intolerance, the more extreme elements of the antithesis position dig in deeper, offering up intolerance of their own, condemning the sheeple who still cleave to the narrative and proposing alternative stories which range from convincing right up to frightening. Some of the worst, home straight in and old enemies, the Jews as ever, are a popular target. This in turn allows proponents of the thesis to conveniently represent any opposition to their line as dangerous and worthy of censorship. Fear and suspicion reign. Neither tribe is talking to the other, and each assumes the worst of their opponents. Take these two positions, electrify them, pour them through the sieve of misery that is social media, and you have the current vaccine wars. The rage that swirls around the attitude to the COVID jab is a substitute for something else. Underneath the arguments about whether or not to take a vaccine glides in something older, deeper, slower, something with all the time in the world, some great spirit whose work is to use these fractured times to reveal to us all what we need to see, things hidden since the foundation of the modern world. COVID is a revelation. It has lain bare splits in the social fabric that were always there but could be ignored in better times. It has revealed the compliance of the mainstream media and the power of Silicon Valley to curate and control the public conversation. It has confirmed the sly dishonesty of political leaders and their ultimate obeisance to corporate power. It has shown how ideology on all sides can mask itself with the pretend neutrality of science. Most of all, it has revealed the authoritarian streak that lies beneath so many people and which always emerges in fearful times. In the last month alone, I've watched media commentators calling for censorship of their political opponents, philosophy professors justifying mass internment, and human rights lobby groups remaining silent about vaccine passports. I've watched much of the political left transition openly into the authoritarian movement it probably always was, and countless liberals campaigning against liberty. As freedom after freedom has been taken away, I have watched intellectual after intellectual justify it all. I have learned more about human nature in the past 2 years than in my preceding 49. I've learned some things about myself too, and I don't especially like them either. I've noticed my ongoing temptation to become a partisan, to judge and condemn those on the other side of the question, to find a tribe I can join. I've noticed my tendency to seek out only sources of information which confirm my beliefs. Most of all, though, what the COVID apocalypse has revealed to me is that when people are frightened, they can be very easily controlled. Of all the stories we're watching play out right now, this is the biggest one: the manipulation of public fear to impose unprecedented levels of control on populations. The ongoing nature of the COVID threat, the endless boosters, the endless variants, means there is no end in sight to this so called new normal. Like the war on terror before it, the control and monitoring of citizens in the name of public health, the segregation of the virtuous vaxxed, or any day now boosted, from the antisocial unvaxxed, the internet wide censorship of whatever Silicon Valley labels disinformation, and the widespread obedience of the once mainstream press to an agreed story towards which they clumsily try to nudge their readers. None of this has any sell by date. This is the story of the times. Across the world, we are seeing an unprecedented claim to control, staked by the forces of the state in alliance with the forces of corporate capital over your life and mine. All of it converges on the revealed symbol of our age, the smartphone-enabled QR code that has, with frightening speed and in near silence, become the new passport to a full human life. As ever, our tools have been turned on us. The COVID vaccines, whatever their other virtues, have not prevented transmission of the virus, as governments have now publicly acknowledged. If they had, we would not be where we are. For this reason alone, there can be no justification for systems as divisive and as anti-democratic as vaccine passports or lockdowns of the unvaccinated. If we were operating as we pretend to be from the ground of reason, if we were really following the science, then we would be dismantling these systems at this point. Instead, we are moving deeper into them. We are being herded into a future in which scanning a code to prove you are a safe and obedient member of society may become a permanent feature of life as unquestioned as credit cards and driver's licenses. We are moving towards enforced mandatory vaccination of entire populations, including children, with potential prison sentences for those who refuse. The thesis, if left unchecked, leads straight to tyranny, but the danger of cleaving entirely to the antithesis is a potential descent into paranoia. Both positions thrive on fear of the filthy other, who must be destroyed, with a barrage of claim and counterclaim, backed up by links to studies about ivermectin or vaccine side effects. Lindbergh puts his hope in the possibility of forging a synthesis of the two positions, but in order to get there, he says both sides must discover and inhabit the fears of the other, something which looks less likely by the day. As someone who began this pandemic journey cautiously cleaving to the thesis, but who has tipped towards antithesis as the narrative has unspooled and the dishonesty of its proponents has become clear, I can explain my own fears easily enough. In a short but momentous 2 years, we in the West, who have spent decades, if not centuries, lecturing the rest of the world about freedom and sometimes trying to bomb them into accepting it, have abandoned ours without so much as a murmur and begun enthusiastically scapegoating those who question this path. We who invented this thing called liberalism are now burying it and building on the bare soil some technocratic state corporate hybrid, a China-style social credit society, centralized, monitored, powered by algorithms, emphatically unnatural and unfree. We are in a revolutionary moment. Societies are being transformed with no public discussion and no consent into a version of a Silicon Valley nerd's wet dreams. Until we can reach some form of synthesis soon, unless the sheeple can address the fears of the COVIDiots and vice versa, then we risk being blinded to where the real power lies and what is being constructed around us as we bicker and insult and pontificate. COVID has been both revelation and accelerant. Now the direction of travel is increasingly clear. Unless we actively refuse it, our future looks like a QR code flickering across a human face forever. And this is have been an essay by Paul Kingsnorth at unheard.com. That's UNHERD. I'm too gloomy about the prospect of a synthesis because the elite is all in on the thesis. The elite is not going to back away from the thesis because that would mean admitting that it had been wrong and that its decisions had led to, well, terrible consequences. And they're not going to do that. Because if they were to admit that they were wrong about something as serious as this, then why would anyone take them seriously ever again? I suppose it might take something, cataclysmic to end this. That is to say, there were many people in the West, for 100 years or more, had called themselves socialists. And socialism, despite its failures everywhere in the world, was entirely respectable. And then one day the Berlin Wall fell down. And after that, the Soviet Union was dissolved. And we woke up and suddenly there weren't any socialists anymore. Instead, as Paul Gottfried explained, they said, oh, yeah, now we're multiculturalists. We have this new thing. So, yeah, we were wrong about socialism, but you should believe us about multiculturalism because we're the experts and we're never wrong. And even if we are wrong, which we're not really going to admit, we see into the future better than you do. So you must listen to us. We have graduate degrees and the like. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Dionysus, Enron, Dan, Tricky Who, William Hicks. KMG is looking oddly white. Well, I don't know. Can I do something about that? Is that any better? Do I look oddly pink now instead? No, I think that's about the best it gets. Tricky Who says, Internet of Bodies, impact investing, blockchain, digital twinning, smart cities, and data harvesting, etc. Welcome to the virtual gulags metaverse. True Greenberg says they admit it doesn't work, but still demand we get it. How much longer are we going to take this? Well, as I've mentioned before, and speaking about socialism again, the failures of socialism and communism, what to do? We need more socialism and more communism. We haven't been rigorous enough. Now, you might recall that around the year 2000, there was the end of history thesis. It was going to be what? Liberal capitalist democracy everywhere forever. Nothing was ever going to change. And then what happened? Well, a few short years after that, the world economy nearly collapsed. And I thought, well, perhaps since it's been demonstrated that the world economy is a rigged casino in order to benefit the 1%, there will be major changes. But there weren't any major changes. And we were told, remember the Time magazine cover, the Committee to Save the World? No, let's let Alan Greenspan and the like have even more power. Globalism is scientific. It is ineluctable. You cannot oppose it. You would be on the wrong side of history, which of course these are exactly all of the things that were said about communism. William Hicks says, Kevin, have you heard of the attorney Rainer Feudelmich and the Corona Investigative Committee? If so, have you watched any of their videos on BitChute? No, I have not, but I will look into it. Imagine thinking like Jerry Saltz, says Dan. Well, if these people are being revealed, aren't they? They hate us and they want us dead. The dirt people, as the Z-Man calls them, they really have no right to occupy space and steal oxygen. Imagine still believing you live in America, says Dionysus. Chocokin666, hello, says these are all the people who envision themselves in that trite Nazi rally photo to be this guy. Hello to Professor Paul, and hello to Palcasso88 and David Wright. Hauper says someday room service or a confused visitor will knock and become the first KMG show guest. I don't know. I'm pretty reluctant to let anyone in here, given the milieu. Obtuse, deranged, and malevolent is no way to go through life, son, says Chocokin666. Ashyman Bravo says Morgoth uploaded a pretty lengthy video today on Oswald Spengler and technological dystopia. Frothing Fanboy says, on one hand, they say we are all capable of being killed by corona. Then they talk about the especially vulnerable. So which is it? Yo Mama says, KMG says, do you change your sweater and shoes when you walk in the door? Well, I dress like this when I'm on the air. Typically, I don't. I don't tend to dress like this when I go outside because then I would be a magnet for crazy people. True Greenberg says the only roughness I've run into is from my government employer and media people. I don't even notice any anti-vax hate in comment sections. All the hate is coming from the elites, nowhere else. Well, I don't know. I mean, I spend a lot of time on Twitter looking at this anti-vax hatred. And I suppose these people aren't the elite, but they are, however, the aspirational. Chocan666 says, most frightening thing that is incontrovertible, the vaccine prevents neither spread nor contraction. Yet if you point this out, these people immediately disassociate. Well, it was, 2 weeks ago, a senior official of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention admitted to the LA Times that even if 100% of Americans were vaccinated, it wouldn't stop infections, new infections. That should have been the page one story around the world, but it was not. Disavowing won't save you, Kevin, says David Wright. Oscar Toe says, hi, Kevin in chat. Also, I am based. Glad to hear it. Ashley Man Bravo says it also seems that Neil Howe and William Strauss have this materialistic scientific view of history where they can predict certain outcomes given certain conditions. Yeah, well, yeah. Early on, yeah, I'm not going to say that. William Hicks says, I watched This Week last Sunday, listening carefully to the Fauci segment. It was basically an infomercial where Fauci kept saying, get vaccinated, get boosted multiple times. No mention of potential side effects, no discussion of VAERS. The commercial following the segment was for an antidepressant, which had all the usual warnings to see your doctor if you have various and sundry symptoms. There are an awful lot of pharmaceutical ads that run on MeTV. And so many of them are absolutely hair raising. Well, first, I should say, a lot of them, the ads don't tell you what the drug is for. And then they start talking about problems with your white blood cells. Uh-oh, this isn't heading in a good direction, which could lead to death. Also, my favorite, don't take this drug if you are allergic to it. How would you know? How could you possibly know whether you were allergic to it? Okay, who else do we have here? E. Michael Jones recently had a discussion with Kevin McDonald on Revolutionary Spirit and the Culture of Critique as Evolutionary Strategy, says Ashimane Bravo. I think that Kevin McDonald has valuable things to say, but I don't believe in evolution, so I don't believe in evolutionary psychology. William Hicks says, I've heard a couple of doctors on the radio completely dismiss VAERS, which just passed 19,000 deaths, 100,000 hospitalized. And of course, we know that VAERS is voluntary. Yes, Sting, yes or no, says Don Willis. Okay, yes. Yes to Sting. Hello to G's Histal. And Rodion Raskolnikov says, do you have a graduate degree? KMG, no, I don't even have an undergraduate degree. But of course, I'm joined in that by no less than William Henry Gates IV, a.k.a. Bill Gates, a.k.a. Mr. Vaccine. Metal Mike says, the technocrats have the courts and force on their side. How then do we check their thesis? I rather hope it doesn't come to that, but the answer is obvious. Hello to Jaakko Raipala, our Finnish friend. Of course, it's most likely simply because they have calculated the vaccine aren't good enough for mandates. Smart CCP authoritarians versus idiot Western authoritarians. Choose your poison. And hello to Don Willis again. Yes, I answered your question about Sting. Oscar Toe says, I'd be happy if the left really were like Salts and just wanted to leave us alone to die or whatever and stop pushing the vaccine, but they are not as honest as Salts and won't stop pushing. GC Style says the anti-vax people are very prevalent on Twitter. Yes. Will you do a dress down Friday? Says Rodion Raskolnikov. No, I won't. That's the beginning of the end. When I was in San Diego, they had Casual Friday. And I didn't like Casual Friday because good-looking casual clothes are expensive, whereas, your standard armor here is not particularly expensive. And so I dressed down. I wore a sport jacket, a tie, and slacks. And people started coming up to me saying, hey, Cav, it's Casual Friday. I said, yes, I know, but you're not dressed casual. Does that bother you? But it's Casual Friday. Yeah. Okay. KMG has a degree from the streets, says. Did you read that article on U2 on the American Sun, says Chogokin 666. No, I haven't. Kevin is like Ed Asner on Curb, says Anrun. Buddy predicts the elite will back away from COVID tyranny, much like the neocons escaped from Iraq war. Okay, so we're still on this dread topic. This is from Kane at Citizen Free Press. Three Aussie teenage heroes make illegal escape from COVID quarantine camp. Northern Territory Police said they don't believe three teenagers who absconded from Darwin's Howard Springs COVID quarantine facility this morning came into contact with members of the community. At a COVID update press conference, Northern Territory's Chief Minister Michael Gunner confirmed the teenagers, aged 15, 16, and 17, tested negative for the virus yesterday. He said all three were from the Binjari community near Catherine and had been sent into quarantine as close contacts of positive cases. The health risk to the community was very low, so that does give cause for comfort, Gunner said, but there is absolutely no excuse for the actions of these three this morning. The facility is housing people affected by the Catherine region COVID-19 outbreak. In the whole of the Northern Territories, how many cases do you think they've had since the beginning of this? 100? 50? Absconding from Howard Springs isn't just dangerous, it's incredibly stupid, Gunner raved like a madman, because we will catch you and there will be consequences. Yeah. Have you ever seen videos of Gunner? He's really frightening. This is from Agence France Presse, Dateline, Johannesburg. A preliminary study by South African scientists published Thursday suggests the Omicron variant is 3 times more likely to cause reinfections compared to the Delta or Beta strains. But the number of vaccinated keeps going up. Why is this happening? Again, must be miasma or an imbalance in the humors. The findings, based on data collected by the country's health system, provides the first epidemiological evidence about Omicron's ability to evade immunity from prior infection. The paper was unloaded on a medical preprint server and has not yet been peer-reviewed. There were 35,670 suspected reinfections among 2.8 million individuals with positive tests until November the 27th. Cases were considered reinfections if they tested positive 90 days apart. This is from Emily Craig at the Daily Mail. Omicron variant is at least 2.4 times more likely to reinfect people who have previously had COVID. South African study finds this country records a 368% week-on-week rise in cases and a 180% jump in hospital admissions. Well, you see, this term hospital admissions is not much use, because anyone who goes to the hospital for any condition and is found to have COVID is written down in the books as a hospital admission due to COVID. Oh, and vaccinated. Oh, I see a bait and switch happening here. This is, again, from Kane, Citizen Free Press. Fauci definition of fully vaccinated likely to change. Okay, first it was 1 jab, then 2, a booster shot. Now it's going to be 3, 2 booster shots. And England has already moved to 4. Again, you can see where this is going. Well, you see the unvaccinated are responsible because the number of, look at the number of people who remain unvaccinated, fully vaccinated. Oh, but that's gone from 1 to 2, now to 3 probably in the United States, and already to 4 in England. This is Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. The World Health Organization has questioned the UK government's decision to roll out hundreds of millions of booster jabs to its population, asserting there is, quote, no evidence they would offer greater protection, unquote, to the healthy. No, but wait, we have dueling experts here. What are we to do? And more from the WHO. Again, this is from Agence France Presse. The WHO warned Wednesday that the world was creating toxic conditions for new COVID-19 variants like Omicron to emerge and then spread around the globe. The WHO said the combination of low vaccination coverage across the planet mixed with very low testing to track the virus was a fertile breeding ground. Breeding ground for terror, apparently. And Here is a story from RT. Successful vaccine rollouts have failed to stop COVID transmission, with new data showing the prevalence of the virus increasing in fully jabbed individuals, according to a medical study in The Lancet, not known as a journal of conspiracy theorists. Examining new infections in Germany, researchers found that the rate of cases among fully vaccinated individuals aged 60 and older has risen from 16.9% in July to 58.9% in October. And yes, there is a hypothesis for this, which is very controversial. This is from Carl Denninger at marketticker.org. In Israel, a nosocomial outbreak was reported involving 16 healthcare workers, 23 exposed patients, and 2 family members. The source was a fully vaccinated COVID-19 patient. The vaccination rate was 96.2% among all exposed individuals, 151 healthcare workers, and 97 patients. 14 fully vaccinated patients became severely ill or died. The 2 unvaccinated patients developed mild disease. Not just oops, VEI, vaccine enhanced infections. Again, from The Lancet, many decision makers assume that the vaccinated can be excluded as a source of transmission. It appears to be grossly negligent to ignore the vaccinated population as a possible and relevant source of transmission when deciding about public health control measures. I don't know. How do we explain this? Maybe the presence of the unvaccinated among us represents a vast pool, a lake, an ocean of sin, and the vaccinated are being punished for not eradicating this sin. I don't know. Perhaps people are arguing that already. I would not be surprised. Vox Day has an article on and he has a chart. Daily new cases of COVID-19 in Arizona. Note the failure to conform with the usual shape of a bell curve in the 3rd wave starting on July the 5th. Meanwhile, Germany demonstrates that it has learned nothing from the disaster that happened the last time it followed an Austrian's lead. How much of this lockdown mania do you think has to do with Christophobia? Oh, we have to cancel Easter. Then we have to cancel, Thanksgiving. It's Puritan holiday originally. Then we have to cancel Christmas. Oh, but in 2021, we have to cancel Easter. We have to cancel Thanksgiving. And the Daily Mail, Ronnie Reyes asks, has Omicron killed Christmas? Businesses across America are forced to decide whether or not to throw holiday parties as super mutant variant begins its U.S. spread. But is it all one big overreaction? White House officials are discussing having events on the South Lawn and requiring negative COVID tests. Baltimore's New Year's Eve spectacular was canceled again, as city officials said things won't return to normal until 2022. New York Mayor Bill de Blasio said the city's New Year's Eve outdoor party at Times Square is still on and masks aren't required for vaccinated people. In Europe and the UK, there were more heightened fears after a party in Norway infected 60 of the 120 guests. Janet Street Porter in the Mail, who is a longtime veteran of the media in Britain. She's been around so long that you can see her dancing in Antonioni's film Blow Up, which came out in 1966. She said that it is not the government's business where I am on Christmas, who I am with, etc., etc., etc. But no, apparently everything we do is the government's business, except when it has to do with sex. And then it's not the government's business because sex is not important. It's a trivial thing in the human condition. What are the numbers on the ground from Ontario? This is from Carissa Wilson of CP24. Ontario reports 959 new COVID-19 cases, 8 more deaths. Among the latest cases, 446 of the individuals are unvaccinated. 23 have received one dose of a vaccine. 429 are fully vaccinated, and 61 have an unknown vaccination status. Unvaccinated individuals represent 23.5% of Ontario's total population and 47% of the cases logged today. Well, those numbers are going to change. They're going to change. They've changed radically in the last few weeks. Here's a story from Nick Arama at Red State. We've covered a few stories about LeBron James lately, and it probably isn't as much of a secret that James is very liberal. We wrote about his attack on Kyle Rittenhouse, mocking him crying in court. We also covered Boston Celtics center Enes Kanter Freedom blasting James for defending China and not caring about how they oppress their people, despite James claiming that he cares about human rights. Usually the media in covering a James story is all in on positively covering him. But the media seemed pretty reluctant to fully cover the story that hit the air about James today. I was sent an ESPN story about that news. Now, if you looked at the headline and the first few paragraphs, you might have no idea what this story is about. Los Angeles Lakers LeBron James in health and safety protocols, expected to miss several games, sources say. If you're not familiar with the term, and many are not, you might think he injured himself. Talk about burying the lead. But many other media outlets followed ESPN's lead, saying that he just entered the health and safety protocols, not being explicit in their headlines. This is an extremely reluctant way of saying he has COVID, but ESPN didn't even mention COVID in the story until the 13th paragraph. Even in that paragraph, they don't say he has it. They just talk generically about what a player must do according to league rules if one has it. They don't say anywhere in the article that he has COVID. They're even that hesitant to even do that. So why is the media trying so hard not to say he's got it in those simple and clear terms? Can we call it a pro-James bias? ESPN does say that he got the vaccine in September and that he is asymptomatic, although asymptomatic from what? Who would know? Since they don't say. Maybe they'll simply, someone as famous as LeBron James. How come LeBron James isn't playing? I suppose they could make up some story, right? Maybe we're coming to that. Oh, and I love highlighting these stories because we keep getting them more and more and more. And we're talking about professional athletes here who are the fittest people in the world. This is from J.D. Miles at CBS 11 Dallas Fort Worth. The Dallas Cowboys are preparing for a game Thursday night, that would be tonight, unlike any other in the franchise's history. At least 9 players and coaches, including head coach Mike McCarthy, won't be in New Orleans because of COVID-19. So, second to last paragraph. It's been reported that all 9 players and coaches who will miss the game are vaccinated. Again, why does this keep happening? Now let's look at Canada here. Right from the very beginning, the Canadian media, the Canadian elite has taken the position that COVID-19 is just another example of how Canadians are morally superior to Americans. Also more intelligent. They're just crazy down there with all their talk of freedom, as if anyone cares about that. Huh? This is a story from the Toronto Star by Althea Raj. It's described as a opinion piece. It is pretty much a press release for the Liberal government. Don't take advice from the Conservatives on COVID-19. The pandemic is not over, Transport Minister Omar Alghabra reminded the country Tuesday as the government announced stringent new measures to help thwart the spread of COVID-19's new Omicron variant in Canada. The rules, mandatory on-arrival testing for many air travelers and quarantining in government facilities for some, are tough and could be expensive and time-consuming at a time when Canadians seem to be no longer afraid of the virus and treat it as a mild inconvenience. Perhaps it was a needed reminder that life, especially for many outside our borders, is not back to normal. Well, the ministers mentioned 12 times that the rules could change at any moment as the situation evolves. The ministers also urged Canadians to remain cautious and prudent. Public health measures won't stop the spread of the virus if Canadians don't abide by them. Get vaccinated, social distance, wear a mask, respect capacity limits. These things have not worked. They haven't worked. The number of new infections is going like this. But no, get vaccinated, social distance, wear a mask, respect capacity limits. Because if the Canadian government tells you to do something, then do it. Why haven't you done it already? And here is Don Martin, who's been around forever and is certainly the worst political writer in Canada. I mean, his opinions are standard issue, but technically his writing is atrocious. This is Dateline, Fort Myers, Florida. Bobbing in the pool with a noodle for extra flotation, the Floridian gasped in disbelief as I listed Canada's mobility limits on the unvaccinated. No planes, no trains, no buses, no restaurants, no bars, no theaters, no wedding receptions, no company Christmas parties, no federally regulated jobs. All off limits because of what this seemingly intelligent retail research manager argued was an unaccepted imposition of personal choice for her body, a view worthy of major pushback. If we weren't sitting by the pool in the heart of Donald Trump loving Lee County, you see, they're all dumb rednecks down there. In Canada, I rather meekly pointed out, meekly, I don't think so. She drifted away in search of friendlier conversation. She would be choosing a severely limited lifestyle. Masks are extremely optional down here, and the option to go without one is exercised by 90% of shoppers, 99% of diners, and 100% of beachgoers. To enter a hardware store wearing a mask means you will be immediately identified as a staffer and asked for directions. To wear one indoors at a restaurant means you're a Biden-loving Democrat or a Canadian. Only in drugstores are masks a common sight. Yet, strangely, the state has only doubled the COVID case count of Ontario on November 30th, which is 3/4 of Florida's population, and the number is inexplicably dropping. Inexplicably. Don Martin doesn't mention that the population of Florida is substantially older, as well as substantially fatter than the population of Ontario. But I suppose he doesn't think that these things are relevant. Oh my God, how can the case numbers be dropping in Florida? They're doing it wrong. They're not following the Canadian way. The world needs more Canada. That's the slogan. And by that, what that means is the world needs less freedom. Because only stupid people and Americans care about freedom. Alex Berenson, whose book Pandemia was released this week. Oh, by the way, Barnes and Noble is apparently refusing to carry it, although you can get it from Amazon. German physician scientists reported Monday that not a single healthy child between the ages of 5 and 18 died of COVID in Germany in the first 15 months of the epidemic. Not one. Even including children and adolescents with pre-existing conditions, only 6 in that age range died, the researchers found. Germany is Europe's largest country with more than 80 million people, including about 10 million school-aged children and adolescents. Serious illness was also extremely rare. The odds that a healthy child aged 5 to 11 would require intensive care for COVID were about 1 in 50,000, the researchers found. For older and younger children, the odds were slightly higher, about 1 in 8,000. Another 8 infants and toddlers died, including 5 with pre-existing conditions. In all, 14 Germans under 18 died of COVID, about 1 per month. About 1.5 million German children or adolescents were infected with SARS-CoV-2 between March 2020 and May 2021, the researchers found. Here's another one from Unreported Truths. Yeah, all you need to know about what people really think about the COVID tribe the media feeds them. Yes, so that one is hidden. And Alex Berenson found out that people had reported that they had tried to buy his book, Pandemia, from Powell's, and they couldn't find it. And apparently Powell's has made it difficult to find it on their website. Big surprise there. This is another example, certainly with Barnes & Noble, because his book is doing very well indeed on Amazon. It's a bestseller. And one would think that Barnes & Noble would want some of that website action, but no, they have decided that they do not. And let's go to dailyskeptic.org, formerly Lockdown Skeptics. And it's just Europe has descended into madness. Oh, there's a funny tweet from Neil Coyle. The BBC had reported cocaine worth 78 million pounds seized by police in Northampton. He responded, "That's this year's Downing Street Christmas party ruined." We were talking about forecasts, the wisdom of forecasters and their critics. We're publishing a sort of review of a book today called Applied Wisdom, 700 Witticisms to Save Your Assets by Alexander Ineichen, a Swiss financial analyst. The review is by Edward Chancellor, a financial journalist and author of Devil Take the Hindmost, A History of Financial Speculation. The book consists of a collection of aphorisms that Ineichen has collected over the years, and even though they're intended to apply to the business of investing, most of them are applicable to speculation about the virus and its impacts. As Chancellor explains, both economists and epidemiologists attempt to forecast an immensely complex system, namely human society, equipped with models and data inputs that are not up to the task. Here is an extract. Ineichen says that markets are governed by Gump's law, derived from a line in the movies Forrest Gump, which states that life is a box of chocolates because you don't know what you're going to get. When you next encounter someone who confidently predicts the course of the pandemic, some of the following responses might be apposite. From Peter Drucker, forecasting is not a respectable human activity and not worthwhile beyond the shortest of periods. From Edgar Fielder, the herd instinct among forecasters makes sheep look like independent thinkers. From Nassim Nicholas Taleb, anyone who causes harm by forecasting should be treated as either a fool or a liar. Some forecasters cause more damage to society than criminals. And from Geert Gigerenza, many of us smile at old-fashioned fortune tellers, but when the soothsayers work with computer algorithms rather than tarot cards, we take their predictions seriously and are prepared to pay for them. Well, I remember when I used to write about the mining industry, I paid a lot of attention and published a lot of data about forecasts for mining companies. And I spent a lot of time, planning out about a particular company and recent forecasts, and I found that they were pretty much all the same. Now, it's clear that the banks and financial institutions were looking at what had been published recently, and they did not want to be outliers. Now, these forecasters, in financial institutions, have been wrong about the mining industry again and again and again. That oh yes, the externals look good for this company. Well, what about, systemic changes? Well, no, they don't consider them. So if the externals look good, then, in 52 weeks, the share price of this company is going to be X. Now, if it's nowhere near X, if it has actually fallen from where it is now, instead of, going up 12%, well, the externals said that it was going to go up. This is a really shocking story reported by Daily Skeptic. And it's Dr. Ann Bradshaw, a retired lecturer in adult health care, about the scandal of the government's failed efforts to import nurses from Kenya in a vain attempt to solve Britain's nursing crisis. The UK nursing staff crisis shows that the current system of recruitment, retention, and training of nurses is not working. In July 2021, the UK government made a memorandum of understanding with the Kenyan government to take 20,000 of its 30,000 unemployed nurses to Britain. I didn't see this publicized in the press and thought it strange that Kenya has so many unemployed nurses. Then I saw in Nursing Times that the Kenyan government would be taking a cut of these nurses' salaries. Then I saw that this was denied by the UK government. Then I saw that Kenyan nurses were failing English language tests. Then on November the 11th, I saw that this UK recruitment of nurses from Kenya was being halted because Kenya is on its list of countries facing a shortage of health workers. So why is there such a problem recruiting and retaining nurses in the UK? Why has the UK government been forced to look to Kenya for nurses? I have argued elsewhere that the move to become academic by the nursing elite was not primarily intended to improve care for patients. Its primary objective was to improve the status of the profession and divorce it from medicine. This revolutionary change to make nursing academic has had, from the evidence that I have adduced, a disastrous impact on both recruitment and retention of nurses. Much of this so-called academic body of nursing literature is esoteric and of extremely dubious academic quality. Indeed, the highly ranked, prestigious international nursing journal, the Journal of Advanced Nursing, admits this in an editorial by two UK nursing professors titled, "Is Academic Nursing Being Sabotaged by Its Own Killer Elite?" In my view, nursing's killer elite is the blob, and it is not merely killing the academy, it is killing the purpose of nursing, care for the patient. This has been clear to me long before this editorial. Very many of the published research papers I read were shoddy methodologically and irrelevant to the needs of patients. Anonymous peer review rejections sent to me over the years when I sought to publish articles critically analyzing these pieces of research revealed reviewers' biased gatekeeping. Reviewers' comments were devoid of knowledge and revealed a lack of interest in any critical thinking. It seems to me that so-called academic nursing is an emperor with no clothes and a means of protectionism. That is why there is a chasm of division between the needs of National Health Service patients and the wants of the nursing academy. Nursing professors and lecturers generally do not work on the wards. They are the university nursing blob, divorced from the concrete realities of practice. That is why the NHS cannot use student nurses as part of the NHS workforce, thus immediately solving the nurse staffing crisis. It is why the UK looks to Kenya to provide nurses for the NHS. Surely this is a scandal. Well, there have been many scandals in Britain in recent years about, oh, yes, we have a shortage of doctors. Why would you have a shortage of doctors? We're bringing in doctors from Germany. Oh, well, they're from Germany, so they must have high standards. And then the doctor who turns out to have killed a patient because he doesn't understand decimal places turns out to have a Nigerian name and to have been born there. Angela Merkel demands mandatory vaccination laws. Germany is set to impose restrictions on the unvaccinated. What a horrifying face this woman has. NHS faces its biggest cancer catastrophe ever due to pandemic backlog. Oh, pilots out of practice after lockdowns are risking passengers' lives. Commercial airline pilots have done so little flying during the past 21 months that we may be about to witness a fatal plane crash. That is the message of air accident investigators after a serious incident in which a Boeing 737 hurtled towards the ground at Aberdeen Airport on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. New study into why AstraZeneca vaccine can cause blood clots. And the scapegoating of the unvaccinated, well, I've already talked about. This is a different essay. Scientist under investigation by the Royal Society of New Zealand for defending science. In my column in The Spectator this week, and that would be from Toby Young, I've highlighted an egregious assault on free speech in New Zealand that was brought to my attention by the New Zealand Free Speech Union, which has issued a statement about it. A distinguished biochemist, Professor Garth Cooper, is being subjected to a disciplinary investigation by the Royal Society of New Zealand that could result in his expulsion. Why is this distinguished scientist at risk of being expelled from New Zealand's most prestigious academic society? Several months ago, he was one of 7 signatories to a letter in the New Zealand Listener that took issue with a proposal by a government working group that schools should give the same weight to Maori mythology as they do to science in the classroom. That is, the Maori understanding of the world, that all living things originated with Rangi and Papa, the sky mother and sky god, for instance, should be presented as just as valid as the theories of Galileo, Newton, and Darwin. And more on this from the Washington Free Beacon. And this is a story by Aaron Sibarium. The 2 accrediting bodies for American medical schools now say that meritocracy is, quote, malignant, and that race has no, quote, no genetic or scientific basis, positions that many doctors worry will lower standards of care and endanger lives by discouraging vital genetic testing. The Liaison Committee on Medical Education, which accredits all medical schools in North America, is co-sponsored by the American Medical Association and the Association of American Medical Colleges, the same groups that on October 30th released a controversial guide to advancing health equity through language, narrative, and concepts. Those concepts include the ideas that individualism and meritocracy are malignant narratives that create harm, that using race as a proxy for genetics leads directly to racial health inequities, and that medical vulnerability is the result of socially created processes rather than biology. How about sickle cell anemia and Black people? Suppose the medical profession said, no, we're not going to, just because you're Black, we're not going to make any effort, to worry about sickle cell anemia because the whole idea of race, it doesn't exist. There's no such thing. There couldn't possibly be any asymmetrical racial differences in medicine. No. This is slightly medical related. Tracy Wright in the Daily Mail. Selena Gomez slams troll who criticized her for sharing a drinking joke on TikTok after receiving a kidney transplant in 2017. So these people don't know the difference between the kidneys and the liver. But what I found most interesting is that the question of what constitutes heavy drinking. And Dr. Dawn Bantel had the video explaining what heavy drinking looks like for men and women. Selena looked nervous and bit her nails as she watched Bantel explain various alcohol levels men and women should medically tolerate. The CDC defines heavy drinking as 15 or more drinks a week for men. Well, there's 7 days in a week, so that is 2 drinks a day constitutes heavy drinking. 2 drinks plus, this much more, constitutes heavy drinking according to the Centers for Disease Control, which is just absolute bollocks. The Ledane Commission, circa 1970 in Canada, which looked into alcohol and drugs, concluded rather more sensibly than that 35 or more units a week would constitute heavy drinking. Of course, that's 5 a day or more. Essentially, the CDC is saying stay away from alcohol entirely, which is certainly a radical position, but it's not really surprising, given that, if any substance can cause harm, then you must avoid that substance entirely. This has been mainstream thinking for decades now. There is no safe level of air pollution. Well, if there's no safe level of anything, why should we be frightened? Oh, and I'm going to be talking about this documentary on the Beatles. It's called Get Back, on the recording of their, final released album, which is a dog, by the way. So Peter Jackson has an 8-hour plus documentary on this, so we can get to see John, Paul, George, and Ringo looking extremely shabby. But there's a smoking alert that comes with the documentary. All 3 episodes of the program each open with a warning about explicit language, mature themes, and smoking. Actually, George Harrison, if I recall correctly, at one point was smoking 5 packs of cigarettes a day, which strikes me as excessive. No question about it. And there's an old Jewish joke that some people say it is best not to be born, but few of us are that lucky. This is from Lawrence Dalmore at the Mail. A show jumping star who sued her mother's GP, claiming she should never have been born, has won the right to millions in damages in a landmark high court ruling today. Evie Toombs, 20, was born with spina bifida and sometimes spends 24 hours a day connected up to tubes, but has forged a career in show jumping, competing against both disabled and able-bodied riders. Last month, in a unique wrongful conception damages claim, Evie from Skegness sued Dr. Philip Mitchell over his failure to advise her mother, Carolyn Toombs, 50, to take vital supplements before getting pregnant. She claimed that if the doctor had told her mother she needed to take folic acid supplements to minimize the risk of spina bifida affecting her baby, she would have put off getting pregnant until she had done so, and as a result, Evie would never have been born at all. Or I suppose the doctor could have advocated abortion. My third child was born when its mother was in the late 30s, and tagging along to doctor's visits, I was getting this very strong, disturbing sense that the doctor was attempting to bully us to abort the child because, it's going to come out, horribly deformed because, as I say, its mother was, in late 30s. But I guess they're trying to avoid suits such as this. Let's go to the chat. What is that excessive if smoking isn't bad for you, says Anne Run. Ashley Main Bravo says, yeah, it has been alleged that Richard Spencer was used as a Fed asset, perhaps unbeknownst to him. My Trail of Disgrace says, Du fast den Farb film vergessen. I think this is a very early song from Nina Hagen's East German period, which was more pop than new wave punk. British American says there are 2 killers, bad genes and stress. Their absence explains how so many people with bad lifestyle habits live to very old age. Their presence explains how so many with good habits die young. GC Style, 5 packs a day. I smoked 2 packs a day 30 years ago and couldn't do more. That must be one of those hilarious, situations where time for another cigarette. No, I've got another one going. No, wait, I seem to have 2 of them going at the same time. Oscar Toe says, if stress is a killer, then I'm living on borrowed time because all my life I've been a nervous wreck. Brandon Smith says, I have coworkers that routinely cough up a lung before heading out for their 5th smoke break in an hour. Who else do we have here? Metal Mike says, warning, scenes of tobacco use and heteronormative behavior. I remember seeing the original Let It Be movie, and it was just so depressing. They don't like each other, and the songs are rubbish. But now apparently people want 8+ hours of it. The leaders of the Oath Keepers and 3%ers are also known Fed, says Ashimont Bravo. Peter Jackson is the new Ken Burns, asked Don Willis. New Toy. New Toy. Okay, I remember that song. Isn't that a Thomas Dolby song? Okay. Now Austria's finance minister, Blümel, has also resigned. Okay. Schallenberg has announced resignation. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Now we're getting reports of the CIA molesting children. I don't know why anyone would be shocked by that. Ashley Man Bravo says, Savage Kid tells Jill Biden, that's Dr. Jill Biden to you, to shut up during a public elementary school book reading. I suppose the First Lady of the United States doesn't really have much to do, but you all remember that on 9/11, the President of the United States was in some school reading a book, I don't know, what, to 8-year-olds or something. It was called My Pet Goat or something. Why? To prove that the president can read? To prove that he's not allergic to school children? They don't vote, school children. Doesn't the president of the United States have better ways to occupy his time? Hello to Quachalango. I'm a blue-pilled normie like Doc Paul. Okay. There was someone that I used to work with who was, well known in dissident circles in Canada, who once expressed the suspicion that I was a Fed. And I was angered by this. And I sort of laughed and said, yes, this is the greatest deep cover operation of all time. Living in grinding poverty and, destitution for year after year after year. But, paranoia runs deep amongst people on the right. Very deep indeed. Brandon Smith says the book was the signal to insiders that it was them. I just discovered yesterday that Newhart's character on his first show was always called Doctor, even though he was only a PhD. Do you think Alex Jones is a Fed? I don't really think about Jones much. As I say, he's too shouty. He's too shouty for me. Colin Colenso says Alec Baldwin was attacked by a self-firing loaded gun. Yes, he's claiming now that he did not pull the trigger. Did not pull the trigger. It just went off, apparently. Let's talk about the American dream. What the American dream used to be, which was, the house with the lawn, the white picket fence. This is from AmericanMind.org. Own Nothing and Love It by Joel Kotkin and Wendell Cox. An unholy alliance of planners, financiers, and leftists wants everyone to live in mass social housing developments because that's worked so well, in America and in Britain and in the banlieues of Paris. Shoving people together in hideous concrete blocks. It's so very, very healthy. From the ancient world to modern times, the class of small property owners have constituted the sine qua non of democratic self-government. Today, this class is under attack by what Aristotle described as an oligarchia, an unelected power elite that controls the political economy for its own purposes. In contrast, the rise of smallholders were critical to the reemergence and growth of democracy, first in the Netherlands, followed by North America, Australia, and much of Europe. Today, the current class of smallholders face a threat from two powerful hegemonies, tech and financial interests, and increasingly intrusive bureaucracies. Both favor policies that would force higher population densities, which would likely raise housing costs and lead to lifetime renting for middle-income households who would otherwise own their own homes. These forces, one long associated with the right and the other the left, share a common agenda, though for different reasons. Financial interests would reap a steady profit stream by creating a rentership society where potential owners are transformed into tenants, guaranteeing the benefits of increasing land values. Today, pension funds and Wall Street firms are buying up single-family homes, often at prices too high for the average buyer. For their part, the planning clerisy believes that dense urbanism is socially, economically, and environmentally superior. Some even favor a return to public housing, which not long ago was rejected as a massively failed experiment. For much of the recent past, density advocates insisted that the public, particularly the young and educated, wanted out of private single-family homes. But in virtually every major country, the vast vocal people have chosen suburban and ex-urban locations. In the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, and Western Europe, including London and Paris, as well as Toronto. Even New York City, with its surprising increase since 2010, has gained only 900,000 residents since 1950, while the suburbs have grown more than 6 million. Some density advocates see high house prices as reflective of economic prowess, but suburbs account for the largest share of new jobs in both Europe and the US, where suburbs dominate new patents. For years, surveys have consistently shown that the majority of Americans of every generation prefer a single family home with a yard over living in a condo or apartment. Two-thirds of millennials before the pandemic favored suburbs as their preferred residence, and they overwhelmingly place priority on home ownership. In fact, more than earlier generations. Moreover, since 2000, minorities have accounted for roughly 96% of suburban and ex-urban growth. These preferences have only been strengthened by the pandemic, which generally hit hardest in urban areas with overcrowded housing, stressed transit, as well as entrenched poverty. Realtors report a growing interest in suburbs, leading to strong price increases occurring in the suburbs and exurbs. This is a global phenomenon, with people heading to the periphery, not only in Australia, but also in France, Canada, the United Kingdom, and elsewhere. France 24, a government-owned international television service, produced a program on the pandemic-related exodus from Paris. The pandemic has also sparked a surge in prices for less dense parts of Britain. The rise of remote work suggests this shift may be just starting. I'm not fond of the suburbs, actually, as it turns out. It's an artificial way to live. But of course, people move to the suburbs because they can afford a home there. I think that the best arrangement would be people to live in cities of modest size, but the difficulty there is, where is the work for the people who live in these cities of modest size? If you look at a place, that Jim Kunstler knows well, that is to say, upstate New York, it has been absolutely obliterated by globalism. That just no, businesses close and close and close and close. And if you want to buy anything in any of these formerly thriving small towns, you have to drive and drive and drive, which rather defeats the point of living in a small town. Yeah. Again, let's just stack people up in the sky and see how that works out. Because the 1% is angry that people own their own homes. How dare they? Your parents weren't rich or smart enough for you to own your own home. It's a story from newgeography.com. Canada to tax home equity. Yes, it has been suggested. The fury, if the Trudeau government brings this in, the fury that this would foment could lead to revolution. I'm not joking. In Canada, where income-adjusted house prices vary more than 5 times between metropolitan areas, the threat of a federal initiative to tax house equity could be looming. That's the conclusion columnist Lauren Gunter, writing in the Sun Media, came to. The headline read, Liberals laying groundwork to tax homeowners' equity. Officials are softening up the ground for such a tax by insisting it is unfair that today's homeowners have so much value in their homes, while so many others cannot afford homes. According to Gunter, the evidence is in a report by the federal government's Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, parts of which have been obtained by a Blacklock's reporter. The report, Wealth and Generational Equity, whenever you heard that word equity, you know that bad things are coming. Wealth and Generational Equity in Canadian Housing, according to Gunter, will be released at some point after the September 20th national election. House prices adjusted for incomes are far higher in the Vancouver and Toronto metropolitan areas than in much of the rest of the nation. According to the Demographia International Housing Affordability, published by the Frontier Center for Public Policy, the median house price divided by the median household income is 13.0 in Vancouver, 9.9 in Toronto. By contrast, Demographia reports that median housing prices were 6.1 years less of median household income in Edmonton, median multiple of 3.8. Today, there remain a number of metropolitan areas with median multiples even lower than Edmonton. Just 15 years ago, Toronto housing prices were only 1.6 years of income more costly, with Toronto's median multiple being 4.4 and Edmonton's 2.8. This was just after the Ontario government had implemented its Greenbelt policy, which, like elsewhere in the world, has been associated with huge increases in house prices relative to incomes. The problem with such policies is that they ban or severely limit development on the urban periphery where land is affordable. This creates a scarcity of housing prices, a scarcity of housing, which drives up house prices throughout the housing market, while extinguishing opportunity for young households and others of more limited means, including many immigrants. That is one of the major reason why house prices in Vancouver and Toronto are simply unaffordable to anybody 1%, or perhaps the 2 or 3%, is immigrants, because we brought millions of people into this country in recent decades, and of course they create their own cohort, and they all have to live somewhere, which means that housing prices go up and up and up. And it's not a question of the number of units, because at Vancouver in recent decades, the number of places to live has exploded, even as housing prices have exploded. Once again, if you cram many more people into the same space, housing prices are going to skyrocket. If Canadian politicians were serious about making housing affordable in Canada, they would declare immigration moratorium. There's a story in the Fordham Observer by Joe Kotke. Questions remain after sudden termination of English professor. Christopher Trogan was let go mid-semester after mixing up the names of 2 Black students. Yes. You see, Trogan said, "I've done my best to validate and reassure the offended student that I made a simple human error. It has nothing to do with race." And this fellow, Trogan, is a shit lib. And he made it clear. He sent a very long email giving all his bona fides in terms of, intersectionality and the right. And this just made people angrier. There's a lesson there, that your groveling is not going to save you. And an amusing story from RT, or at least amusing to me: Russia won't extend gas transit deal. This is by Johnny Tickle, or Tickell. Is that his real name? Russia does not want to extend its gas transit contract with Ukraine after 2024, when the current deal ends, the head of the Kiev-based state-run oil and gas company Naftogaz claimed Monday. Speaking to Reuters, Yuri Vitrenko said there is not even a hint of negotiations on a new contract. Transiting gas from Russia to Europe is an integral part of Ukraine's economy, and the country receives billions of dollars annually from Russian energy giant Gazprom for its use of the aging facilities which were constructed by Moscow during the Soviet period. Following the completion of Nord Stream 2, a controversial gas pipeline that connects Russia to Germany without passing through any third country, many in Kiev now believe the country's economy is under threat as Ukrainian pipes become less critical for the European grid. Earlier this year, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that Nord Stream 2 would disconnect Ukraine from gas supplies, which in turn would cost Ukraine at least $3 billion a year. "We will have nothing to pay the Ukrainian army," he told a delegation from the U.S. Congress. Well, ha, ha, bloody ha. Yes. Oh, of course, it would be completely unnatural that Ukraine would be aligned with Russia, especially given that, Russia kind of evolved from the Ukraine. Kievan Rus. No. You want to ally yourself with the United States, and you want to ally yourself with NATO and other forces hostile to the existence of Russia itself. And Putin is telling the Ukraine to get stuffed. And once again, this is very amusing to me. This was a surprise to me. This is again a story from RT by Lila Guest. The world's largest nation should be partitioned by Western powers and divided up into around a dozen separate states, Ukraine's former foreign minister has said, insisting the move would be beneficial for all concerned. Speaking in an interview with Ukraine's Channel 5 Monday, ex-Foreign Minister Vladimir Ogrysko argued that the West should go all the way on the issue and allocate hundreds of billions of dollars for new countries to be carved out of territory currently governed from Moscow. Imagine that a collection of independent 10 to 15 non-nuclear nations is created in place of the current Russian Federation. Who will benefit from this? Everybody wins, Ogrysko claimed. According to him, the US and EU would be able to profit highly from the state-making venture and would make the money back that they spent rehashing Russia's borders. These are the sort of maniacs that America and my country of Canada and the United Kingdom, they're allied with maniacs like this. A final solution to the Russian problem. And, let's talk about cats. Let's talk about Beware of Kitty. Again, as I like to say, the New York Times appears to inhabit an alternative universe. These cute cats online, they help spread misinformation. A mainstay of the internet is regularly used to build audiences for people and organizations pushing false and misleading information. This is a story by Davey, Davey, Alba, who appears to be a woman from the Philippines, a recent immigrant to the United States. On October the 2nd, New Tang Dynasty Television, a station linked to the Chinese spiritual movement Falun Gong, posted a Facebook video of a woman saving a baby shark stranded on a shore. Next to the video was a link to subscribe to the Epoch Times, a newspaper that is tied to Falun Gong and that spreads anti-China. Ooh, no, not anti-China and right-wing conspiracies. The post collected 33,000 likes, comments, and shares. The Epoch Times, my view on it and Falun Gong, I think the Epoch Times is a valuable repository of information that would not be printed elsewhere. Falun Gong is witchcraft as far as I am concerned. But again, I don't see it as much of a threat as the Chinese Communist Party. The website of Dr. Joseph Mercola, an osteopathic physician who researchers say is a chief spreader of coronavirus misinformation online, regularly posts about cute animals that generate tens or even hundreds of thousands of interactions on Facebook. The stories include kitten and chick nap so sweetly together and why orange cats may be different from other cats. Written by Dr. Karen Becker, a veterinarian. And Western Journal, a right-wing publication that has published unproven claims about the benefits of using hydroxychloroquine to treat COVID-19 and spread falsehoods about fraud in the 2020 presidential election, owns Liftable Animals, a popular Facebook page. Liftable Animals posts stories from Western Journal's main website, along stories about golden retrievers and giraffes. Videos and GIFs of cute animals, usually cats, have gone viral online for almost as long as the internet has been around. Many of the animals have become famous. There's Keyboard Cat, Grumpy Cat, Lil Bub, and Nyan Cat, to name just a few. Now it is becoming increasingly clear how widely the old school internet trick is being used by people and organizations peddling false information online, misinformation, researchers say. The posts with the animals do not directly spread false information, but they can draw a huge audience that can be redirected to a publication or site spreading false information about election fraud, unproven coronavirus cures, and other baseless conspiracy theories entirely unrelated to the videos. Sometimes following a feed of cute animals on Facebook unknowingly signs users up as subscribers to misleading posts from the same publishers. How about misleading posts from the New York Times, which was the chief cheerleader for the, oh my God, Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction and he's probably going to use them. Oh my God, we're all going to die. They just beat on that drum for years. And after it was proven to be a lie, was the New York Times devastated by this? No, they took one reporter and made a scapegoat of her, but the good gray lady didn't really suffer for propagating one of the most disastrous conspiracy theories of modern times. And oh yes, what's happening in Canada? This is absolutely sickening, but it's typical of what happens in my country, which is referred to as a democracy. Ho ho, very satirical. How about politicians discussing bills before they pass them? No, we've moved beyond that. This is the Twitter page of Scott Aitchison, Member of Parliament for Parry Sound, Muskoka, Shadow Minister for Labour. And love is love. Today is one of the proudest days I've had in this place. Today, Parliament chose love over hate and fear. The House of Commons has unanimously adopted a motion by Conservative MP Rob Moore to pass C4, the government's bill to ban conversion therapy in Canada through all stages without amendment. This was done secretly, and there's no vote held on this because Aaron O'Toole, the fearlessly conservative leader of the Conservative Party, decided that he has to get into a competition with the Liberals and the NDP as to who loves the alphabet people the best. Yeah. So nothing really spells love to me like a 13-year-old girl deciding that she's really a boy. And so, yes, she needs to get, hormone treatments in order to permanently stop her growth, both physically and mentally at the age of 13. And then later, perhaps to cut off both of her entirely healthy breasts. What a loving series of acts that is. And now in Canada, shortly, it will be a criminal offense for parents of a 13, 12, 11, 10-year-old girl to say, no, we think you should talk to someone about this. A criminal offense. And there's an MP for Calgary. It was called Michelle Rempel Garner. And so she posted after this atrocity in Parliament a picture of herself surrounded by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 men who have a particular kind of face. And I can only assume that here's Michelle Rempel, the famed proponent of legalizing poppers in Canada. Look at me with all my gay friends. I am so very, very progressive. Yeah, okay. And before I move to Theater Thursday, which will be very shortly, Steve Saylor takes a look at a story from the San Francisco Chronicle. President Joe Biden Wednesday unveiled his new HIV/AIDS strategy to end the more than 40-year-old epidemic, calling for a renewed focus on vulnerable Americans, including gay and bisexual, Black and Latino men, who his administration says are too often stigmatized, even as they are disproportionately affected. The new strategy, which declares racism a, quote, public health threat, unquote, was released on the annual commemoration of World AIDS Day. It is meant to serve as a framework for how the administration shapes its policies, research programs, and planning over the next 3 years. But Biden acknowledged that the country still needs to work to destigmatize HIV/AIDS and noted that alphabet people and racial minority groups have endured the brunt of the epidemic that's killed more than 36 million worldwide, including 700,000 Americans. I want to make sure that everyone in the U.S. knows their HIV status. Steve Saylor comments, after all, what's more respectable than getting AIDS while shooting heroin while being sodomized by some guy you met 10 minutes before in the Arco restroom? We need to destigmatize random sodomy and heroin injection. That's the only way we can have less HIV. Structural inequities forced gay Black men to have to shoot heroin while being sodomized. It's not like they liked injected heroin while being sodomized. It's just that it's straight white people's fault. The AIDS epidemic has been almost completely bogus from the beginning. You have it if you have a whole bunch of systems and symptoms, what it's like 40 or 50 now, they just keep adding more and more and more. You show no evidence of, you know, AIDS, but if you have, you know, HIV, then, you know, with the rest of these symptoms, like tuberculosis and a whole bunch of common conditions, then you have AIDS, and it means money. It means federal government money. As I like to say, I like to quote Tom Bethel, who said that AIDS seems less, and he said this decades ago, and AIDS seems less like a disease and more like a political program. So I think I'll talk about Rhodes Scholars and NASA tomorrow. We're into Theater Thursday now, and I'm going to talk about a movie called Ford versus Ferrari. And I'm going to have to warn you that, you know, you might find this triggering. Okay? You might find this triggering because it's about a time back in the 1960s when evil white men ran America. And apparently it was the thing. I know it sounds crazy, but apparently white men, a lot of them were interested, obsessed, one might say, with being the best at one could be, and this involved danger. Well, perhaps even better, you know. But an automobile reviewer for Bloomberg was absolutely appalled by this movie. And what is this woman saying? Hannah Elliott. She wrote November 15th, 2019. Ford versus Ferrari depicts a generation of car guys that's best left behind. Carroll Shelby epitomizes the worst of that 1960s car world. Well, Carroll Shelby, who was married 7 times and whose personal life was, well, rather louche. Yes, he epitomized the worst of something, but it wasn't the 1960s car world. She begins Ford versus Ferrari, which opens Friday, starring Christian Bale and Matt Damon, follows British racing driver Ken Miles and hot rodder Carroll Shelby as they build a special race car to help the Ford Motor Company beat Ferrari at the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 1966 and 1967. The goal was to break Enzo Ferrari's stronghold on international racing that had his Scuderia Ferrari winning everything throughout the 1960s. They strike an odd couple pair. Miles is a wiry, eccentric Brit. Shelby is a square-jawed, cowboy hat-wearing Texan, neither much like the corporate professor exerted by Ford chief Lee Iacocca. No, he was not Ford chief, lady. Henry Ford II was the Ford chief. And his marketing goons, who themselves were humiliated by Ferrari's old world gravitas after a bungled buyout attempt. And there you have the necessary tension for a movie. It's a beautifully shot film that will be enjoyable for modern car buyers and enthusiasts alike. Engines rev, tires squeal, stopwatches click. But what I saw is a devastating picture of the lack of diversity that permeated the industry in the 1960s. If automakers want any hope of relevance in the next decades as they face the most radical changes and challenges they've experienced in 150 odd years of automotive history, they would be wise to contemplate it closely, because Ford versus Ferrari shows a generation best left dead and gone. Picture this: during all 152 minutes of the film, which for those who love vintage racing cars will feel as good as an ice cream sundae on a summer afternoon, men dominate the screen for 98% of the time, by my unofficial count. They are in the executive suites at Ford and Ferrari, in the workshops and garages in Venice, on the track out at Willow Springs Raceway. And when I say men, I mean white, straight men. Is she assuming their gender? No fraction of the storyline is devoted to parsing the thoughts and feelings of any female who appears even peripherally on screen. Instead, Catriona Balfe, who plays Miles' wife Molly, is presented as the doting mother. She smiles mildly and nods her head indulgently as her husband struggles to gain traction in the race world She clucks and scolds like a schoolmarm when Miles and Shelby come to blows on her front lawn. No, she does not. She brings out a lawn chair and a magazine. She is, in fact, not a clucker and a scolder. She doesn't want to lose her house. And Ken Miles is not making enough money out of racing, which he understands. The reason that there's so many white people and men in this movie, because that's what the racing world was in the 1960s. And should James Mangold, the director, have shoehorned a bunch of dusky chaps into this film? You know, Ron Howard was pressured to do that in Apollo 13, and he said, no, I'm not putting them in my movie because they weren't there in Houston at the time, in Houston and, Cape Canaveral. So I'm not going to be false. But of course, now that we see African women playing medieval English princesses on TV regularly, I suppose there's no stopping this. But let's examine this. Let's examine this. If automakers want any hope of relevance in the next decades as they face the most radical changes and challenges they've experienced in 150 odd years of automotive history, they would be wise to contemplate it closely. That makes no sense at all. So the assumption apparently means that diversity means better products, better innovation. Does it? Is there any evidence of this? In the 1970s, and I'll have more on this tomorrow, NASA decided that diversity was its number one priority. And how's NASA done since the last moon landing? They can't do anything anymore. They can't do anything anymore, but that's not really important because there are plenty diverse now. So how would car makers actually let people know that, oh, we're plenty diverse? Well, we see their TV commercials, and their commercials are plenty diverse. They're in fact, they have more blacks, more Hispanics, more Asians than are in the American population. But how would you express this in an automobile, in a vehicle? Could you name, a sedan the intersectional or something like that? Or perhaps, DIE for diversity, inclusion, and equity? Obviously, this is not possible. But you see, there's a certain type of woman who is absolutely enraged by men getting together to do male things, like tinkering with cars, to make them cooler looking or to make them faster. Now, it doesn't seem to work the other way around. Women get together with other women to do things, and men's attitude is, yeah, that's fine. Why would I care? But no, men getting together to have fun, doing what they love, we can't have that anymore, particularly, if it's white men, white, straight men. There was a similar reaction, to this film in some quarters to Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Oh my God, the 1960s in Los Angeles. Oh yeah, but wasn't that a roiling decade of feminism and gay rights and all that? No, this is two straight white guys in Hollywood, and we see their world, right? And we can't have that. Oh, and Los Angeles sure looks wonderful in Tarantino's reconstruction, but no, that was a bad place to be. I don't know, because there hadn't been a black president, and most homosexuals were in the closet, even in Hollywood. I like this film very much indeed, and well, because it's about an era that is gone, an era that was in many ways better than our own. If one looks at the racing world for some time now, you see that the time of Ken Miles, who is the who was the test driver, and then the SCCA driver. The old race car drivers, they were all tinkerers. There wasn't much money in racing then, except at the highest levels, and these people worked on their own cars for quite a long time now. Cars have been far too complicated for tinkerers to do much with, and they're computerized now, increasingly computerized. And well, racing is much safer than it was, of course, but this comes at a cost. A cost of, at one point, Formula One decided, no, we're going to remove gear shifts. Drivers will just push a button to move to the next gear, and then a computer will decide, when is the best time to shift to a higher or a lower gear. The men who are shown in Ford versus Ferrari weren't just hot rodders. They were people who knew their cars inside and out. And I have to say, looking at these gorgeous sports cars, SCCA on the track, curvilinear. People love curvilinear designs. They are the most beautiful. They are the most aesthetic. They are the sexiest, if you will. But no, the automobile industry has decided that no, everything is going to be a wedge. Everything is going to be a wedge now. And do people like wedges? Do they like that design? Well, we're going to give it to you, whether you like it or not, because it's more efficient. And efficiency is the highest value of all. We see Ken Masters. We see him at work. And what's the goal? The goal is to put the biggest, most powerful engine in the lightest car possible, which leads to problems, which leads to a lot of problems. There's a hilarious scene near the beginning of the film where Ken Masters is about to race in California, and some official comes and says he's disqualifying his car because a suitcase of a certain size won't fit in the trunk. Because these are sports cars. They're supposed to be street legal. They're not. It's preposterous. And so what we see is we see Ken grab. He gets a wrench and he opens the trunk and he just starts hammering away at it. And we're thinking, oh, this is an expression of anger. No, it isn't. He's actually physically altering it so that this suitcase will fit in it. A team from Porsche had shown up because they were interested in him. He's not particularly interested in them. Perhaps it could be because he served as a tank commander in World War II. But he, in a rage, he throws the wrench and shatters his own windshield. And so Matt Damon, playing Carroll Shelby, says, frame that wrench. This is how high a regard that Carroll Shelby had for Ken Masters, because he realized that race car drivers are not normal people. They're certainly not like the suits at the Ford Motor Company. Matt Damon and Christian Bale give, I think, outstanding performances. With regard to Christian Bale, Ken Masters had a broomy accent, and I suspect that it's a little exaggerated for this film. That people, from the Midlands and the North can be a little hard to understand for North Americans. But I would say for most people watching this movie, you'd want to have the subtitles on. So, because otherwise you're going to lose about a third or more of what Christian Bale has to say. This film was in, as they say, development hell for about a decade or more. And it's one of the last great successes of 20th Century Fox, which I have explained previously on the show to my enormous irritation. Disney, which was somehow allowed by the U.S. government to buy it. Now, Disney now has a stranglehold on movie theaters. Oh, no, they changed it to 20th Century. Oh, we're just going to erase William Fox from history. Are we? One would think that Disney would be proud to own that mark. But no, it's just Disney, 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 Disney. I mean, there shouldn't be any other motion picture studios allowed. Let's talk about the acting in this. Tracy Letts, who I have enjoyed both as a playwright and as an actor. He plays Henry Ford II. And Henry Ford II was the son of Edsel Ford. And Edsel Ford died relatively young at the age of 49. And there was an attempt to immortalize him in the late 1950s with a Ford automobile called the Edsel, which was one of the most spectacular flops in automobile history. And many people cruelly or hilariously pointed to the grille design, which they said was uncomfortably reminiscent of a certain female body part, normally kept hidden. And I don't know, perhaps Henry Ford II was so driven to show up Ferrari because, he wanted to prove to the world that it was not just, his name on the company and that Henry Ford had been his grandfather, but he was a great man of the automobile business himself. Letts he's tremendously versatile in his roles, and he really plays Henry Ford II, well, both with irritation and gravitas. That is to say, I am in charge, but I am not a stupid man, and I am, willing to learn from people who know more about me, which is expressed in a scene when Carroll Shelby puts him into the Ford GT40, and let's rev it up, and we see Henry Ford II moaning in terror during the ride, and then collapsing into tears, near hysteria at the end of it. Because yes, you can turn on your TV or you can go to the raceway, and you can see the cars. Being in it is it's a very different experience. I was pointing out that Tracy Letts played the father in Greta Gerwig's film Lady Bird, and that's an exceedingly a different role than the one they plays in Ford versus Ferrari. But we used to expect that from actors, versatility. They call it acting. John Bernthal is good as Lee Iacocca. I don't know. I never, of course, I grew up with Lee Iacocca. First he was at Ford, and he was behind the Mustang, and then he famously went to Chrysler and then begged for a bailout, which he got. I never considered Lee Iacocca to be a big man, physically imposing man, but the actor who plays him, John Bernthal, is. There's less of Lee Iacocca in this film than you might think. And Josh Lucas plays Leo Beebe, who is he's the designated villain of this film. You see, it's very much Mad Men, except on the track. Everyone is wearing suits and white shirts and skinny ties. Only this character, he has a very sort of slightly Beatleish haircut here, and he's an absolute menace. He has no idea about racing. He calls Ken Miles, a beatnik, and he doesn't want him anywhere near the Ford racing team. And even after he has been, proved wrong, he uses his executive power to keep interfering. And as we find near the end of the film, to cruelly deprive Ken Miles of what would have been the triple crown of endurance racing, with the idea of a stupid stunt where all three of Ford cars were to cross the finish line at Le Mans at the same time, just to drive home the idea of Ford's dominance. Unfortunately, the cars do not start because there's so many cars on the track. They don't start on a single line. Some of them start farther back. And so the race officials ruled that even though Ken Miles would have won the race rather easily, that no, he was knocked down to second place. And I was reminded watching this film that New Zealanders used to be made of sterner stuff. That some of the top race car drivers and team leaders in the world, like Bruce McLaren, say, and Chris Arnon, apparently that spirit has been bred out of New Zealand. Catriona Balfe, who plays Ken Miles' wife, Molly, is a very attractive woman. And I think she gives a good performance of a woman who is a long-suffering wife who is entirely supportive of her husband and his chosen career. But as I mentioned earlier, there are limits. And Carroll Shelby wants Ken Miles on the Ford team, and Ken doesn't really like the racing bureaucracy, corporate bureaucracy, and his wife is rather distraught about this. You went to see, you went to see Carroll, didn't you? It was about a car, wasn't it? You can't do this. There's no money in racing. Well, yes, Ford is going to, spend all that it matters. Yeah, but you can't keep sacrificing your life. And then he says, well, it's going to pay $200 a day plus expenses. $1,000 a week, if you're assuming a 5-day week. And of course, they didn't work a 5-day week, but let's just say $1,000 a week, and then so we can round that up to 50,000. That is like about $750,000 a year. Now, she is shocked and delighted by this. This would be a movie that would be best seen in a theater, perhaps in IMAX. But I suppose you can simulate that with a big screen, a big flat screen, and a good stereo system, because this is a really visceral film. The cinematography, the editing, the sound design is all, it's putting you in the driver's seat of one of these incredible cars. And we see that the Ken Masters he's got a very close relationship with his vehicles, because he is in a way midwifed them. And we see Ken Miles appreciating his cars as something special, something uniquely his, although, many other people worked on them. And such as, there's a great scene in it. The final lap of a race. This, I suppose, harks back to Howard Hawks's, his last film, Red Line 7000, that you do not bring the revs up to 7,000 or higher, or the engine is going to blow out. But Ken Masters is convinced that he can do this, and he is given permission to do it. And it is an absolutely thrilling moment. We don't get much from the Italians in this. Enzo Ferrari, we see him expressing contempt for, well, basically America and Ford. We don't see much of the Italian drivers, and they seem rather thuggish, actually. Ken Miles said, this isn't in the movie, but he said that to him, the worst thing about Ferrari was how many of his drivers he killed. In fact, in the racing community, Enzo Ferrari was known as the assassin. And of course, Ken Miles wanted to win, but Ken Miles also wanted to live. And so Ken Miles died. I mean, spoiler alert, sorry. But Jim Clark died. Ayrton Senna died. There was just a commonplace. You know, a top race car driver, was dying every week back in those days. And the fact that the Ken Masters died on the track due to a defective car. Of course, these cars are all defective in one way or another, because they're you're really straining the limits of physics, and that's a large part of the joy. And I really have to salute James Mangold and the writers, Jez Butterworth, John Henry Butterworth, and Jason Keller, for not making a phony film, for not introducing diversity where it didn't exist, or introducing sexuality where it didn't exist, or somehow making Ken Masters' wife the secret genius. Oh, she happens to mention something that leads to a radical design change in the car, and it's only after that they win. No, there's nothing. There's nothing like that, because that didn't happen. And sometimes the truth is enough. And it certainly is enough in this film. There was a fair amount of trepidation about this film, up to when it was released and when it was released, because there have been racing car movies in the past. They have not generally been successful. Ron Howard made one, which is good, and it's based on a true story, and it wasn't successful. But this one was, again, perhaps the 60s nostalgia has been found able to be directed in certain ways. I mean, how many movies and TV shows, documentaries have there been about the dissidents of the 1960s? And we know that they won. But if you look at Ford versus Ferrari, this was in a way the last golden decade of the people who weren't the dissidents, of the people who didn't want to destroy everything. It's I would say this film, because of its personal aspects, is entertaining for people who know a great deal about motor racing, and those who know, well, nothing about it. And so those are my thoughts on Ford versus Ferrari. Is chewing dip superior to smoking cigarettes, says Ashimane Bravo. Ugh. People have asked me, how about a pipe? I said, no, I'm not interested in a pipe, because there's all that goo in it. The virtue of this cigarette is you smoke it and then it's gone. You're not, saving goo. Snuff. I was introduced to that, about 10 years ago, whatever. And then the Canadian government banned it, of course, because I don't know, children not using snuff. Really is neat, and I love it when they jump and the fuel combusts, says Chokehan 666. Stroker Ace, best picture ever. Fight me, says Buddy. Ken Miles was like a test pilot, says William Hicks. And oh yes, I just want to. There's a scene near the beginning where we hear Carroll Shelby, Matt Damon. There's a point at 7,000 RPM where everything fades, the machine becomes weightless, just disappears, and that's all that's left is a body moving through space and time. 7,000 RPM. That's where you meet it. You feel it coming. It creeps up on you, close in your ear, asks you a question. The only question that matters: who are you? And Carroll Shelby was smart enough, when his doctor told him that his blood pressure was so high that he couldn't continue to race because his head or his heart were liable to explode. Chokin 666 says, I chewed beech nut once and I thought I would die. They did not want John Candy to do snuff, says Oscar Toe. Okay, Redman Plug is underrated while working in the mountains, says Don Willis. Who else do we have here? I really miss old style racing. Can-Am, Monza, the Rally and Dakar are still pretty neat, says Chokin 666. I thought that the kart racing was the best ever. The best circuit ever. Because it had all different kinds of racing courses. Speedways and road courses and city streets. And out there in the country, like in Wisconsin. So basically 4 different kinds of tracks. And it wasn't dominated by corporations the way that Formula One is. Also, you were allowed to pass people in kart. And generally, unless your car breaks down or there's some sort of disaster, in a Formula One race, and this has been true for 20 years or more, that the driver that is leading after the first turn is going to be the winner of the race. And that's kind of dispiriting, And again, is Lewis Hamilton one of the greatest drivers ever? Well, maybe, but it's difficult to say. Simply because Formula One has for years been dominated, by one brand or another. And I have to say, with kart, that one man or one family destroyed it out of spite. The family that owned the Indianapolis 500. Tony George is the man who wrecked kart out of spite, because the Indy 500 was considered part of you got points towards the kart racing championship. But Tony George decided that, I don't know, there's something sissified about racing that, isn't on a speedway, that, turning left and right. Oh, that's wicked heresy. A real shame that was. You had Emerson Fittipaldi came to kart, and you had Nigel Mansell came to kart. Those were thrilling days. But nothing lasts forever. Okay. I think that's it. That's it for today. I'm going to be back on the air tomorrow, Friday, with the book club. And I'm going to be talking about Jacques Barzun's From Dawn to a Decadence. And so 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, as per usual. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which would really be appreciated, because I want to get out of here as quickly as I can. Or, I want to make next month's rent, barring that. My PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this: in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.